The truth about enlightenment. When people speak of an enlightened being, most imagine a transcendent, serene figure, free from all worldly attachments. They are portrayed as living saints, always gentle, always compassionate, never angry, never suffering. But is that the truth, or merely an image crafted to satisfy the need to worship something lofty? History has known many enlightened ones, yet looking back, we see that they did not claim sainthood, did not found religions, and did not seek to become symbols. Still, people tend to turn them into legends, overlaying them with supernatural stories and deifying them to the point of detachment from reality. The world prefers a saint to worship rather than a truly free human being. So how does a genuinely enlightened person live? We will not follow vague theories or repeat familiar molds shaped over thousands of years. We will delve into the true nature of an enlightened being, how they view the world, and how they exist within life. This is not the story of a supernatural entity, but the truth about those who have truly seen through the essence of all things. That truth may be far different from what you once imagined. People often think that an enlightened being no longer needs material things, no longer cares about food, clothing, or money, and can live without any of it. In reality, whether enlightened or not, a person still has a physical body that needs food, water, and air. Enlightenment does not turn someone into a supernatural being that can exist without the basic conditions of life. If someone says that an enlightened person needs neither food nor rest, then either they have never met a true enlightened being or they are painting a legend far from reality. The difference in an enlightened person lies not in whether they need material things, but in how they perceive and use them. We often pursue money out of fear of poverty, fear of lack, fear of losing respect. But an enlightened person is not driven by those fears. If they have money, they use it naturally, without attachment or seeing it as a measure of self-worth. If they do not have money, they feel no anxiety. They may live in a luxurious house or sleep under a tree without a trace of disturbance. That is the fundamental difference. However, this does not mean that an enlightened being automatically has everything they need without effort. They still must eat and either find food themselves or receive it from others. Throughout history, many enlightened ones did not live apart from society. They still worked, interacted, and accepted help from others. They did not abandon life but abandoned attachment to life. If someone lives on a mountain, grows vegetables, cooks their own meals, and weaves their own clothes, does that mean they do not need material things? No, they still use material things, they just are not controlled by them. There is a misconception that an enlightened being must completely give up all possessions, but that is not necessarily true. The Buddha renounced his palace not because he opposed material things, nor because he viewed wealth as evil, nor to prove anything through ascetic hardship. He left because he realized that no amount of material abundance could bring true happiness. As a prince, he had all the power, wealth, grand palaces, and servants one could dream of, yet he still felt emptiness. The Buddha's departure was not an act of denying life but a journey in search of truth. He did not leave the palace to live in hardship. He left because he knew that if he stayed, he would never understand the nature of suffering and liberation. After enlightenment, he did not cling to austerity as an absolute ideal. When he realized that physical self-punishment was not the path to liberation, he abandoned extreme ascetic practices and returned to the middle way, living simply, not in luxury, but without denying basic human needs. An enlightened person may possess many things without feeling burdened because they no longer see material things as defining their value. They do not cling to wealth, but they do not fight against material things as a form of penance. They eat when hungry, drink when thirsty, and rest when tired without seeing these as obstacles on the path to liberation. On the other hand, an unenlightened person who abandons all possessions may still be full of desire and fear. They might live deep in a forest without owning anything, yet still be bound by the mindset of ownership. The notion, I have renounced, I am on the path of practice, I am not like those greedy people out there. Renouncing material things is not enlightenment. Enlightenment is letting go of dependence on material things. Wealth is not the problem, and poverty is not the solution. What matters is whether the mind remains bound by external things. From a practical perspective, an enlightened person living in society may still use money, buy food, or own a house. But for them, all those things are means, not ends. They do not strive to earn money out of fear for the future, nor do they cling to possessions seeking safety. They might lose everything overnight and still maintain equanimity. But that does not mean they live passively or wait for help. An enlightened person is not lazy. They may work, create, and contribute, but not for fame or gain. They do it simply because that is their nature. Therefore, An enlightened being is neither someone who lives completely apart from the material world nor someone who denies all survival needs. They live in the world without being bound by it. They use material things without being used by them, and that is what makes them free. People often imagine that an enlightened person is always serene, never angry, never suffering. But is that true, or is it merely an idealized image imposed upon them? An enlightened being still has a physical body and an active brain that reacts to worldly stimuli. But they are not driven by those reactions. That is the point of difference. When we get angry, we are swept away by the emotion. We may shout, argue, or act on impulse. An enlightened person may feel anger arise, but it does not rob them of clarity. They do not repress or exaggerate it. They simply observe it and allow it to dissolve naturally, like a cloud drifting across the sky. They neither resist nor indulge the emotion. This does not mean they become insensitive, unable to feel sadness or joy. They can still delight in the sight of a blooming flower or feel sorrow in the face of suffering. But they are not trapped by joy or grief. They do not cling to happiness nor flee from suffering. When happiness comes, they welcome it. When pain arises, they accept it without resistance. So if an enlightened being is not controlled by emotions, do they still have motivation to act? If they have no ambition, no worry, no fear, what drives them to live and act? This is where many misunderstand. We act to obtain something: money, fame, love, recognition. But an enlightened person does not do anything to achieve a result. They do not act to gain, but act simply because that is their nature, like the sun shining not to be praised, but because its nature is to shine, and like a river flowing not to reach a destination, but because its nature is to flow. So is the inner mind of an enlightened person completely calm? Not exactly, but it is a calm not born of the absence of waves, but of waves no longer disturbing them. When facing difficulties, our mind immediately stirs with worry and fear, trying to control the situation. An enlightened person may face the same challenges, but without resistance. They accept everything as it is. If something needs doing, they do it. If nothing needs doing, they let things be. In any circumstance, they do not lose their inner freedom. Thus, the state of an enlightened being is neither indifference nor absolute happiness as people imagine. It is an inner freedom that is hard for us to comprehend. They do not avoid emotions but are not controlled by them. They do not strive to keep their mind calm because their nature already embodies perfect calm. So is an enlightened being someone with a superior intellect who can understand all the mysteries of the universe? Must an enlightened person know quantum physics, the structure of the cosmos, or complex academic subjects to become truly wise? No. Wisdom does not arise from accumulating information, but from clear seeing into the nature of reality. People usually view the world through a dualistic lens: right and wrong, good and bad, high and low, virtue and vice, success and failure. But an enlightened person is not trapped in those patterns. They see that every distinction is merely a product of the human mind. They do not judge life by ordinary standards, nor are they bound by any rigid value system. When we face a problem, we think, weigh options, and choose. An enlightened person need not choose. For the very first moment, they see clearly what must be done. So how does the wisdom of an enlightened person differ from ordinary intelligence? We can learn, reason, and analyze, but all our thoughts are limited by the past, by existing viewpoints, and by what we have learned. An enlightened person is limited by nothing. They do not reason to find an answer, nor do they have to revisit old knowledge to decide. They simply perceive truth immediately, like a clear pool reflecting everything without distortion by prejudice or fear. There is a misconception that an enlightened person is always right in every situation, but that is not accurate. They can make mistakes. In practical matters, one thing is certain: they never err in seeing the essence of things. They may not know everything, but nothing can obscure their vision. This also means an enlightened person does not need to argue or prove they are right. If someone asks them about truth, they may answer or remain silent, for they know that truth cannot be conveyed in words. Words are merely a finger pointing to the moon, not the moon itself. An enlightened person may use speech to guide others, but they never cling to words or attempt to persuade anyone to believe them. Thus, the wisdom of an enlightened person is not the wisdom of accumulation, but the wisdom of clarity. Not the wisdom of knowledge, but the wisdom of direct seeing. An enlightened person may not know everything about the world, but they know the most important thing: how to live unbound by anything, and that is true wisdom. How then does an enlightened being interact with the world? When they appear among people, they often provoke two opposite reactions. They are either revered as a saint or dismissed as a madman. Why is that? Because an enlightened person does not act according to ordinary patterns. They do not try to please anyone, they do not chase social values, and they do not act to meet the expectations of the crowd. That makes many unable to understand them. Those who seek truth and long for freedom feel a strong attraction when they meet an enlightened person. They see someone who is no longer bound, a peace they have never touched. They are willing to revere and follow, hoping one day they too will achieve liberation. Yet paradoxically, an enlightened person never wants disciples. They do not wish anyone to follow them or depend on them. They simply point the way, but they do not want anyone to rely on them forever. A true enlightened being does not create followers, they only create free individuals. On the other hand, those clinging to power, status, or wealth, those immersed in selfishness, feel uncomfortable when facing an enlightened person. They see them as a threat. How can someone indifferent to fame and fortune, unafraid of loss, and unconstrained by usual rules live in complete freedom? The presence of an enlightened person is like a mirror reflecting the illusions in others, forcing them to face the truth about themselves. That is something many do not wish to see. History shows that many enlightened ones have been opposed, attacked, and even killed, not because they did wrong, but because they threatened long-standing power structures. Does an enlightened person care about the world's love or hatred? They need no honor and fear no slander. They do not strive to become anyone's teacher, nor strive to prove themselves right. If someone comes to learn, they may share. If no one wants to listen, they do not force them. They do not try to change the world, yet their existence naturally brings change. Though they do not want disciples, some will follow them, and others will deify them, turning them into a saint to worship. This leads to the distortion of truth. While they live, they can guide directly and dispel illusions. But when they depart, disciples build statues, create doctrines, deify their teachings, and gradually transform truth into religion and freedom into dogma. Instead of encouraging people to find their own path, they lead them into a maze of blind devotion. Therefore, an enlightened person cares not how many follow them, nor do they need to prove anything to anyone. They move through the world like the wind, unbound, leaving no trace, simply existing as they are. Yet that absolute freedom makes them a mystery to the world, a person who is either venerated or rejected, but never ordinary. Is the absolute freedom of an enlightened being to do whatever they want and go wherever they please? If understood that way, no one in the world is truly free, for we all have a physical body, need to eat, are subject to time and space, and live in a world governed by natural laws. This means an enlightened person does not necessarily have to leave the world, retreat to a mountain, or live apart from society. They can enter life, work, and interact with everyone, yet not be swept away by it. They do not let social rules rob them of inner freedom. They may obey the law and fulfill duties, but they do not see it as constraint, for they neither oppose nor cling to anything. Does an enlightened person still have desires? Desire is not only longing for the body, but also craving anything: wealth, fame, power, recognition, or even the desire for enlightenment itself. An enlightened person is no longer governed by those cravings. They can do everything as anyone would, but they are not bound by any need. If they are hungry, they eat. If thirsty, they drink. But they do not crave. They do not let desire carry them away. They can also live in love without depending on it. If an enlightened person truly possesses absolute freedom, why do so many see them still doing certain things? Teaching, helping others, creating work, and engaging in concrete actions? It is because they do not act from personal motives, but act according to the natural essence of enlightenment. Like a flower blooms not to receive praise, but because that is its nature. Like a lamp does not explain its light, it simply shines. Not because they want to help others, but because compassion is their nature. Not because they wish to do great deeds, but because they cannot do otherwise. A flame burns and radiates light. An enlightened person exists and spreads wisdom without any concept of doing so. Thus, absolute freedom is not escape from the world, but escape from the mind's control. An enlightened person can live in the world without being drawn in, can act without being bound, can love without attachment, can enjoy without craving, can live without fear. Does an enlightened person fear death? This may be the most important question, for people always fear death. Everything they do, consciously or unconsciously, stems from that fear. They earn money for security, seek fame to be remembered, have children to continue their lineage, and follow religion to believe in existence after death. But an enlightened person no longer fears death. Not because they are certain of another life, nor because they believe in heaven or any other realm, but because they have seen the true nature of life and death. We view death as an end, a loss, something to fear. But an enlightened person does not see death that way. They no longer see themselves as a separate individual, no longer cling to a fixed identity or self. To them, death is merely a change of form, like a wave merging into the ocean, like wind changing direction, like a leaf falling from a branch. Its essence never truly disappears. When an enlightened person faces death, they have nothing to fear. If illness strikes, they accept the ailment. If their body weakens, they allow it. If the final breath comes, they let it come without resistance. They do not cling to life, nor do they seek death. They let everything unfold as it is, for they understand that every attachment and every fear is a creation of the mind. When the mind no longer clings or fears, death itself ceases to be an issue. So when an enlightened being dies, where do they go? Do they reincarnate, merge into the cosmos, or is that the end of everything? No one can describe it with words, because it lies beyond thought and belief. An enlightened person need not believe anything about death, for they have already directly seen the truth while alive. They require no explanations, no theories, no beliefs to cling to. For them, life and death are simply different states of the same reality. Thus, the death of an enlightened being is not an end, but a continuation in another form. They no longer exist as a human, but what they have left behind continues to radiate in the consciousness of those ready to receive it. Not because they wish it so, but because the truth they have seen always remains, transcending all boundaries of life and death. They are not born, they do not perish. They are no longer bound by time, nor limited by space. While alive, they were not bound by the world. In death, they have nothing left to lose. And that is absolute freedom. Is there a single path that all of us can follow to attain enlightenment, or does each person have their own journey? Many philosophical, religious, and spiritual traditions have built methods, rules, and systems to guide people toward enlightenment. Yet if there were one universal path, why doesn't everyone reach it? And why do enlightened beings attain that state in completely different ways? The truth is there is no fixed path to enlightenment, no shared formula, no reproducible process. Enlightenment is not a skill to be learned, nor a goal to be achieved through effort. It does not come from outside, from any teacher or doctrine. It appears only when someone truly sees the nature of their own self, perceiving reality without the veil of illusion. This means that everyone's journey differs, since each person is bound by their own layers of illusion. Some may realize the truth in a sudden flash, like a curtain torn apart. Others may spend years struggling with themselves, gradually peeling away one layer at a time. There is a great misunderstanding many people make when seeking enlightenment. They imagine it as a special state, a miraculous moment, an extraordinary transformation. They think that when enlightened, they will become superhuman, gain special powers, feel no emotions, and enter a permanent state of bliss and peace. But those are only images fabricated by the human mind. Enlightenment is not a state, not a feeling, not something to be attained. It is simply the seeing of truth, the truth that there is no one to become enlightened, that every seeking is just a game of the mind, that even enlightenment is not something to own. Because of this misunderstanding, many spend their lives chasing something they will never find. They meditate for decades hoping for a breakthrough moment. They read hundreds of books in search of enlightenment's secret. They follow masters and gurus, hoping one day to be awakened. Yet that very quest is what blocks them. For to be enlightened, the first thing to let go is the very notion of enlightenment itself. Throughout life, people cling to an ego, an identity, a sense of personal existence. But enlightenment is the end of all that, not an end in a negative sense, but the dissolution of illusion, the disintegration of a self that never truly existed. And this is what the mind cannot accept. It will conjure up countless fears, doubts, and temptations to keep the person bound. It will make someone think they're not ready, that they need more time, that they have tasks to complete before letting go. But all those are mere traps. An enlightened person no longer has any questions about themselves. They harbor no doubt, no seeking, no felt need to achieve anything. They no longer cling to the idea of enlightenment, nor feel the need to prove anything to anyone. They do not see themselves as above others, nor as below. They no longer fear death, nor cling to life. They simply are. And the most important thing, they do not think of themselves as enlightened. Finally, what prevents most people from attaining enlightenment, even if they might be very close? It is that they still desire something. They still expect a result, still hope for change. But enlightenment is not a change. It is the seeing that nothing needs to be changed. It is not a transformation, but the realization that nothing requires transformation. And this is the hardest to accept, because people always believe they must become something, while the truth is they were never lacking anything. Thus, the journey to enlightenment is not truly a journey, not going from point A to point B, not a measurable process. It is simply the recognition of what has always been, right before one's eyes, right here, right now. But to recognize that, one must dare to let go of everything they once believed to be real. And that is something very few are ready to do.